And I'm standing on Lexington Green that you can see here. Behind me directly is the famous Minuteman monument, the very famous statue of the Minuteman. Right behind the Minuteman is actually where the town meeting hall was located here in Lexington. And it's no longer standing, but there would have been a few stories tall building standing right there just behind where the Minuteman is there. Some of the other places of interest right over here is Buckman's Tavern. This is the tavern where the militiamen were gathering on that fateful night and early morning back in April of 1775. And of course, it's on the 19th of April, 1775, when the famous Battle of Lexington occurred. This tavern here is a really interesting historic site. It is the original tavern. And you can go and see that here in Lexington. Now, the spot where we decided to film here today is a very specific one, because that's the line where the Minutemen were standing, where these militiamen, we heard maybe they weren't Minutemen, but just militiamen. That was one of the things that we learned from some of our guides here, that they were technically not Minutemen. They were just militiamen from Lexington. Anyway, they were standing in a line here, and there was a larger group. Some of them dispersed because it was taking so long for the British, of course, to get here from Boston. And by the time the British do get here, there's only about maybe 70 of them in a line here, holding their ground, as it were, and making a political statement to the British as they came through. They know they don't have a chance of stopping hundreds of British regulars coming through their town, but they do want to make a statement and make a show of, you can't push us around, essentially. And that road that you see running right back there, that's the road that the British would have taken to Concord. So they come down the road here, they come onto the green, they confront these militiamen standing here, trying to stand up to these British regulars, which was something that seems rather foolish to do, maybe in hindsight, but they do it. They're led by John Parker, who was a veteran of the French and Indian War, so he did have some battlefield experience, but he certainly did not have a militia group that was really in any way equipped to take on, what turns out to be hundreds of British soldiers. In any event, a couple of interesting things. You can see that obelisk across the way was actually constructed as a memorial back in 1799. And most of the men that were killed, 7 of them, are buried underneath that obelisk. There was one that was from another town nearby, and he's buried in that town. They were actually originally buried in the old burying ground, which is just, you can't see it from here, but if you kind of look past into those trees, past those trees there, that's where the old burying ground is, and it is absolutely an amazing place to visit. When you come to Lexington, you have to see this burying ground. The grave markers are made out of slate and are so amazingly well preserved because of the quality of the stone that you can still see the carvings in it. They look brand new almost, even though they're 250 years old now, many of the gravestones there. One of the interesting stories that we learned about here today has to do with a man by the name of Jonathan Harrington, who was one of the members of this Lexington militia who was lined up here, along with his son, also named Jonathan Harrington, who was just 14, who wasn't supposed to be there because he wasn't old enough to be in the militia, but he managed to work his way out there. And his wife, his home is right here, just on the corner of the green. You can see there's this beautiful large white home. That's the Harrington home. And his wife is watching from the home, as others were that were lined up here along the green. One of the biggest differences is you had far fewer houses on the green than you have now, but it is pretty cool that some of those houses are still standing and a lot of others have been built. But anyway, Jonathan Harrington is shot. He's mortally wounded. He literally crawls from Lexington Green over to his house and dies apparently in the arms of his wife there on his porch. One of the 8 to fall that day. No British soldiers were killed in the Battle of Lexington that day, but of course they have to make it all the way back to Boston after they completely fail in their mission, which was to, number one, get colonial stores that were in Concord that had been that had that the colonial militias have been building up in Concord. They had been storing a lot of ammunition and food and other things that they would need if there were a potential fight with the British. They had been storing all of that there. That was the main goal. There's also a secondary goal that's a little under debate. We don't 100% know if they were coming for John Hancock and Samuel Adams. Just down the street there is the Hancock-Clarke House. This was the home that John Hancock's grandfather lived in. He was a minister here in Lexington, and that was his home. And so it was still in the family. Jonas Clark, who was the minister at the time of John Hancock, was married to John Hancock's his cousin. Anyway, and so John Hancock was here with Samuel Adams in Lexington because they had a meeting in Concord. And there were rumors that Thomas Gage, the British general who was in charge in Boston, was also looking for them potentially to try to snuff out this rebellion before it really gets started. The idea is you take out their weapons, their munitions, those stores that they have. They don't have anything to fight with. They don't have the guns, many of which were purchased by the very wealthy John Hancock. You take that away, and then if you take the leadership away, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, well, you've snuffed out the rebellion before it can really start. And of course, this absolutely fails, and the British have miserable experience of trying to make their way back from Concord as they're being sniped at from the woods by the militiamen all along that road. And of course, there is this monument here that talks about the famous line that we think Captain Parker may have said. He may not have. The idea, stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. And that musket that you see there, which is patterned after Parker's own musket, shows where that line was that the Lexington militia was standing in. One other interesting fact is there were a couple of British soldiers after the battle who were being tended to in Buckman's Tavern, and some think that that's why Buckman's Tavern wasn't burned down, because some of the other homes in Lexington were burned down by the British soldiers as they made their way back to Boston. There's one more interesting site that we haven't been to yet, but we're going to see, which is the Munroe Tavern, which was a tavern that's about a mile away from Lexington, which the British were using as something of a headquarters hospital and such at the time of those crazy events on April 19th, 1775. Now, I rambled a lot, but I'm telling you, there's just something about being in the place where it happened and being able to stand in the same, I've been learning about the Battle of Lexington my whole life, it seems. I've been teaching about it for many, many years as a teacher. And now to be able to see the spot and to be able to stand and to see exactly where it happened, it just gives you a different perspective on it. To be able to go into Buckman's Tavern, to be able to go into the Hancock-Clarke House, which, by the way, our tour there was just absolutely amazing. And these are all things that you can do in Lexington. And if you're a history buff like me, or even if you're less of a history buff like Mrs. Lewis, you will love it because there's just so much interesting stuff to learn. And even in the rain, it's been spectacular. We kind of enjoy the rain, being from Phoenix, where we don't get a lot of it. Rain's kind of fun. But anyway, hopefully you got something interesting out of this. I know I was just rambling a lot, but I have loved the experience here in Lexington. So I'm here in Concord, Massachusetts. This is, of course, the site of the famous Battle of Concord, part of the battles of Lexington and Concord. And right behind me, you see the Old North Bridge, which is where that fighting, of course, took place. This is where the colonial militia, the Minutemen, stood up to the British, and they literally turned and ran from this bridge. And you also see the famous Minuteman statue there. Now, we can't go right up to those things right now because they are working on the trail and other things in preparation for the 250th anniversary of this event, which will, of course, come up in April of 2025. But you get a really nice view here from the Buttrick Gardens because the Buttrick family had this house. It's okay. It's pretty fancy. It was donated to the Park Service, and that's where they have the visitor center for this part of Minuteman Historic Park. Anyway, it's really beautiful here, and the drive here from Lexington was amazing, where you realize that you're driving basically along that same road. It was the road the British took from Lexington to Concord and then back, and the stone wall that you can see along the way, historic houses and sites along the way, the Paul Revere capture site, etc., that we saw. Really, really, really good stuff. And what am I missing? Anything? Not missing anything. I'm killing it. So thanks.